We inherently know conflict is not good for our health and that well-being is improved by reducing that conflict. But does the evidence back this up? That's the question on the table today as we welcome licensed marriage and family therapist, certified life educator, and scientist Dr. Amy Smith to the latest episode of the Catalyst 360 podcast. Not only will we be covering the latest research on communication and well-being, but Dr. Smith will also be providing us with practical applications on how to enhance a wide range of our relationships in the process. Thank you for investing a portion of your week with us. I'm your host, Dr. Brad Cooper, CEO of Catalyst Coaching 360, endurance athlete, husband of Susanna, dad and grandpa to 7 amazing kids, 3 of whom joined our family by marrying our own kids, and the reader of every single one of the emails our listeners send. So thank you. We really appreciate you. I got the chance to meet Dr. Smith when she spoke at our Rocky Mountain Coaching Retreat and Symposium in Estes Park, Colorado back in September, where we had coaches from around the country come in to spend time together and learn and just get refreshed. And if you're a coach thinking, wait, what? There's a coaching retreat and symposium specifically for health and wellness coaches? Yes, there is. This was our 5th year. We're super excited about our 6th year next September. It is a very, very special time together. So if you're a planner, we always offer a huge discount on registration for the first 25 registrants to kind of get the ball rolling. So there may still be a few of those left, depending on when you're listening to this. But even the standard registration, frankly, it's a very low cost compared to traditional conferences. All the details on our Institute site, catalystcoachinginstitute.com under the retreat tab, or reach out with questions anytime. Results at catalystcoaching360.com. If you're not yet a coach, but you're thinking about heading that way, you can also find details about the launch of the next MBHWSC approved coach certification cohort there as well. And now it's time to tap into the opportunities for enhanced relationships, enhanced life. Dr. Amy Smith on the latest episode of the Catalyst 360 podcast. It is such a privilege. We got to meet at the Rocky Mountain Coaching Retreat and Symposium a few months ago. You were awesome. The audience loved you. I'm excited to dive another layer deeper today as we go through it. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I loved getting your email after the conference. And like I've told you before, it's my favorite topic to talk about. So can't wait.
Well, that definitely comes out. I think our listeners will sense that. Your research delves into the lifelong impact of close relationships on health, well-being, that kind of stuff. Could you share some of the key findings, some of those insights that maybe were a surprise to you? What are some of the things that you went, oh, I didn't expect to find that, or have the potential to change how we perceive the importance of relationships? I think we all inherently value it. It's like, yeah, relationships matter. It's part of our 4 cornerstones of move, fuel, rest, connect. And yet, sometimes I think we just take a superficial look at it. Can you take us deeper?
Yeah, I think that really the thing that surprised me most was my research goals. So it's always great when what you are hoping to find is what you find, and it surprises you the most. But actually really seeing that our relationships impact us physiologically, and being able to see that that's true and it's real and there's data that supports that, and not just in a like, oh, you get stressed out, so your heart rate increases. I think those things, I mean, we all experience it on a regular basis. So it's kind of intuitive of, yeah, of course, if you're having a lot more conflicts with your partner or, you know, your boss at work is kind of micromanaging, you're going to feel more stressed out. When we're stressed, you know, your stomach's gurgly or whatever that is. Right. Like, I think that's pretty intuitive. I've never gotten a lot of pushback on that just because,
yeah, you're kind of like, yeah, that makes sense.
But in some of the research that I've done that actually shows it's not just, it's kind of like surface level physical interaction, but it actually can change pieces of our physiology. So the example research study I often use for that was in a study I did with the Adolescent Wellness Lab up at CSU. And they were doing a study based off a mindfulness intervention for depression in kiddos that were at risk for type 2 diabetes.
Okay.
And I kind of dovetailed off that project and was looking at video recordings of parents and adolescents and how they were engaging in a conflict related to food. So all of these families kind of had some tension related to food, and we asked them to try to solve a problem related to food in 5 minutes, which, not shockingly, they did not solve the problem usually within 5 minutes, but kind of got a picture of what does it look like for them to have a conflict around a particular trigger area. And when we coded that, we watched all the videos, and I had a coding team that looked at it for a lot of different dimensions of how they were interacting with each other. And the finding that really stood out to me was when parents and their adolescents were able to tackle the problem together, sort of like this team idea of it's you and me against whatever this problem is.
Yes.
It's us working together. So it's not, hey, you need to just manage your, snack foods, or you need to eat a more healthy lunch. It's, hey, how can we figure out a way to get you to eat those better foods? How can we, you want to eat pizza, but you don't like it. So how can we make that happen? That was actually predicted of insulin resistance in the adolescents, which is it's a biomarker for type 2 diabetes development. And we did that controlling for the age of the adolescent, the race of the adolescent, and then their standardized BMI-Z score. And so those are kind of the three predictors that are always controlled for. They're the common predictors of insulin resistance. And so even controlling for that in a pretty small sample size, we didn't have a lot of power. But we found that just the way they talked to each other predicted this outcome. And that, to me, kind of was astounding, that it's not just that surface level, but it's actually changing physical health outcomes and like the trajectory. Having type 2 diabetes can impact their life for a long time. And we know it's getting younger. And so being able to say, wow, the way we parent could change that for our kids.
Wow.
I found that shocking and kind of mind blowing.
That is a great way to blow our minds out of the gate. So can you give us some of those positive versus negative, or the ones that you were looking for in your analysis that you said, ooh, that's a bad one's the wrong word, but that's negative. That one's more positive. Can you give us a few of those that you were looking for in the study?
Yeah. So some of the other variables we kind of look for in terms of, we looked at both parent and adolescent contributors, and then relationship contributors. So for both the parents and adolescents, we looked at things like their ability to accept influence from the other person, or their ability to kind of like stay engaged in the process, not shut down, zone out, or distract from the conversation. Their ability to kind of hear what the other person was saying. So kind of like those are some positive indicators of, are we actually engaging in it? We also looked at, I guess the flip side is the negative view of that. Like, are you checking out? Are you dominating? Dominance was kind of one of the negative traits. So are you kind of like pushing your own agenda, not really listening? And then some of the dyadic ones that looked at both the relationships were things like either positive or negative escalation. So positive escalation is like when you're having that conversation and you're super excited and you start talking faster and, kind of maybe you're interrupting each other or building, but everyone's like feeling that positive energy. It's positive escalation. Negative escalation is, things are not going so well and voices are getting heightened, you're getting tighter. The conversation's not going great, but it's building that negative energy. And then, of course, looking at the degree, the mutuality, that degree to which they were able to really work together as a team in that and feel like they were tackling the problem together.
So as you're describing those, that feels so much more broadly based. I'll use Susanna and myself and our kids as examples as we talk through this, because that's what I know best. But I mean, we have our moments where we're super tired or we've had a really tough day, but generally, if I'm struggling, Susanna's a buffer for me. So she sees that, she adapts, and vice versa. If I see she's at same thing, I'm trying to adapt. It sounds like as you're watching the parents and the kids, it's almost a way of being more than that specific moment. Was that your sense also?
Yeah. So it's a 5-minute interaction we were watching. So it's certainly a snapshot of their communication. And so exactly what you're saying is what we were hoping to get at. Like, what are the patterns of how they're communicating, or what default do they fall into? Because of course we're all going to have that time where we have, we all do all of them, both positive and negative sometimes. But kind of what's that theme? What's the default for how people are communicating? What are those normal patterns we fall into over time?
And it seems like the observer impact, knowing that you're being watched as parents and kids as part of the study would change it. But it sounds like you still saw the positive and the negative come out, even that 5-minute interaction.
I think you'd be surprised if we always think that there's a bias, and I'm sure there is some.
Sure.
We do set it up so it's just a video camera in the room, so easier to figure the camera than a person. Yeah. Right. Probably would be awkward to be like, let me watch you, just sit there and stare at you while you talk. But really, I think when we pick the conflict too, we try to pick one that's not brand new to them. And so I'm sure you can remember if there's that like fight you've always had
Sure.
with somebody, you can pick it up right where you left it off.
Oh, good.
Pretty easily. Like I can go right back into it. So I think that influences how they get back into kind of that pattern.
Okay, that's good. All right, one of the things that I just can't get out of my head from the retreat when you were speaking is you talked about you gave this analogy, you held your hand up and nobody can see us, but you're seeing me, where the frontal lobe of the brain, where the logic takes place, it figuratively like pops up out of the way when we're flooded, resulting in the posterior lobe taking over. And that's not necessarily a good thing. Can you walk us through a better description than I just gave of what's happening in the brain when we are flooded?
Yeah. So when we're flooded, that's just basically another word of being able to talk about how our stress system in our body has been activated, so that HPA axis it's been activated, which the common way we describe that is fight or flight. And so our bodies aren't really great at differentiating between like, hey, there's this physical threat and hey, there's this emotional threat. Our bodies evaluate any threat to us pretty similarly. And so even in conflict where we know our bodies are safe, we can still feel threatened. It can threaten the security of our relationship. It can threaten identities we have about ourselves. And so when we feel that threat, our brain perceives it as dangerous. And it goes, okay, fight or flight, I know what to do with this. And that part of that fight or flight is we don't have access to our prefrontal cortex as much. That's where the hand flipped up.
Right.
But because our brain doesn't need it. I always use the example of if, you go on a hike and you see a grizzly bear or a black bear out on the trail. The thing that you don't need to do is sit there and say, hey, Mr. Bear, I'm feeling really overwhelmed by the fact that you're on the trail right now. It would make me feel a lot better if you just like went back in the forest. The bear does not care about the logic portion of your brain. So you don't need it. You don't need to think about how to politely state your fear in that moment. You need to either fight the bear, make yourself big and scary, or like turn around and get off the trail. And so basically that's what our brain does is it says, oh, there's a threat. I don't actually need to be able to think and, rationally talk to you or logically. I'm going to go to those reactive places because that's what's going to keep me safe from a threat. That might look like yelling, saying those statements that you don't actually mean, like intentionally poking a button that you wouldn't in your most level self. It might look like shutting down, disengaging from the conflict. But that's kind of that hindbrain part, sitting there saying, I know what to do with threats. We fight it, we flight it. Maybe we freeze if we're really startled, or I try to appease the other person with our fawn reaction, but I know how to handle this. What doesn't work well in relationships, though, is it's kind of the opposite. It's actually saying, hey, you're overwhelming me right now is what we want to do. And that's where kind of that calming down and being able to re-engage our prefrontal cortex is really important in relationships.
Right. Just real quick, you mentioned something at the retreat that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. There's obviously the fight or flight is the one we've heard for our entire lives. The freeze is getting more attention in recent years. And then you mentioned the fawn piece. Can you just describe very briefly the freeze and the fawn for people that are like, oh yeah, I get the fight or flight. I think I've heard of the freeze, but I don't have any idea what you mean by fawn.
Yeah. So perfect question. Freeze reaction is sort of that like deer in the headlights moment of I'm not really responding at all. I'm not getting out of there. I'm not engaging, but I've just frozen in spot. And so that pretty much looks like what it looks like. It's just like, I'm not thinking, I'm like startled. I can't say anything. And then a fawn reaction, think of Bambi, your cute little baby deer. And that's what it's named after. It is an endearing reaction, which is if there's a threat towards me, and I can make it like me, I can remove the threat by connecting with them. So, hey, I can appease you. I can just tell you that you're right. You're right. It wasn't that big of a deal. It's all okay. I was overreacting. You're right. I don't even know why we're having this conversation. Let's just not talk about it. It's very much as like people appeasing, which by making the other person feel better, you're removing the threat from yourself. Right. Short term. Usually to the denial of your actual feelings, but it's that very endearing. Oh, don't worry about it. Like there's no threat here because I've just made everybody else feel happy.
Right. I think that happens far more than we realize. You mentioned that when we can accurately identify our emotions accurately, not just superficially, it allows us to integrate that rational thinking back into the equation. I was fascinated by that. Can you dive into both the accuracy of emotions and not just happy, mad, and then what that allows us to do?
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of accuracy of emotions, I always talk about how we have feeling families in there, but the big feeling word doesn't necessarily fully describe what we are. So let's say you are angry right now. I could say you're angry and you could be like, yeah, that pretty much fits. But I could also say you're annoyed, kind of a sub feeling, which would be very different than if you were feeling like injustice, like there was an injustice towards you and that indignant feeling. Those are both angry feelings. Or resentment is another angry feeling. But those are very, very different feelings. When you feel this long simmering resentment towards something, you're not annoyed with it. And if I said, hey, seems like you're really annoyed right now, you're gonna be like, no, I am way more than annoyed right now. And actually you might not be annoyed because I said you were annoyed. But it's not an accurate picture. So even though those are all angry feelings, they're pretty different. And one of them would describe our experience really well. It's going to feel really validating to be like, yeah, you're right. I resent this. Like this is lingering. It's long term for me. But it's going to feel very off-putting to kind of get that word wrong. You're going to be like, well, no, or like kind of like, yeah, I guess I'm annoyed by it, but am I really annoyed? Same thing happens with positive emotions. Excitement and contentment are both happy emotions. I love them both. When I'm really content, I am not excited. I'm just like mellow and chill and like sitting there being like, what a beautiful moment. But I'm not like, oh my gosh, you know what? This is the best day. I cannot wait for this to happen again. Both happy. I'm very happy in both moments, but it wouldn't make sense, to say the other. And so that's the accurate naming of emotions. If we can go to the more fine tune, we're actually getting a better experience of what we're experiencing. And then to go into how that works physiologically, there's this idea called name it to tame it, which is if we can accurately say and be heard for what we're feeling, it helps to tame that emotion and it can calm us down. Is it like that feeling of being understood? I see it happen all the time. And the work I do, if I can kind of accurately give somebody like, hey, is this what you're getting at? It calms us. It just instantly, there's this reassurance of, oh, you understand me. This makes sense. It's okay. And so being able to put that right word in there makes us feel calmer. And then if we feel calmer, that's going to get us in a space where we can either need to continue to calm down if we were really flooded, or sometimes it's just enough to be like, oh, okay, yeah, like you're getting me right now. You're understanding where I'm coming from. No more threat. I don't have to react. I can now think through it and be like, yeah, you're right. I was feeling this. And let me explain to you a little bit more about why. So just being able to say that can help. But we're not always good at getting it right the first time. Even for ourselves, I don't think we've always been taught how to know what we're feeling. And so sometimes we have to practice it a couple of times and even say it out loud, be like, I'm annoyed. Nope, that didn't work. I'm irritated. Not quite right. I'm resentful. Ooh, that one's sad. Sometimes we just have to practice it so that we can know what we're feeling.
So a couple of questions with that. One, can we do that in the moment? And before I forget the second question, I don't know that all of us have the language basis of emotions to clearly identify this sub emotion under anger or happy or whatever. Any tips? So can we do it in the moment? So I'm out on the I-25 today and somebody cuts me off and, it comes out. I'm questioning myself. Would I be able to, in that moment, in that immediate anger response, reaction, whatever we call it, be able to say, I'm feeling disrespected right now or something? Or is it reflecting later so that you're next time? I don't know. Can you walk us down both of those?
I'd say both yes and no for in the moment. I'd say it depends on your moment. So maybe if you're in the middle of your road rage moment, you don't want to sit there and be like, I'm disrespected. Like maybe later on, you can be like, oh, the guy wasn't just a jerk, but I did feel like, and you can kind of regulate yourself after the fact. But I think there's also a lot of times we can do it in the moment. And the more we practice it, the easier it gets. So, let's say, you are standing up front. I'm going to do stage fright as an example. Okay. And you're sitting there and you're like, my hands are shaking and I kind of feel like I'm going to puke. In that moment, you could probably say like, I'm nervous. Like I'm worried about doing a good job. it's okay. I know what I'm doing. In that moment, you probably can, because you're not flooded to the point of kind of not being able to touch into that emotion, but you're there, you're a little escalated. And so being able to sit there and say, okay, I can stop this, I can regulate it. Or maybe it's like you're at the early stages of a fight and you're not like fully to that point where you can't engage, but you're like, I'm getting really frustrated. Maybe, or it's your car example and it's the first person that cut you off, not the third one. You'd be like, okay, that was aggravating. I'm going to let it go though. Like, it's a trigger when people cut me off, but hope they get there safe. Maybe you can do that in that moment. Take 3, maybe not. If you're in that fight, maybe in the beginning stages, you're like, you're just not understanding me. You could sit there and be like, what? I don't even really want to listen to you. Right? What's going on? Oh, I'm feeling misunderstood. Okay, maybe I need to say that. But if it's, to the point where you're already escalated, probably not in that moment. So kind of depending on where you're at, but we can always do it after the fact. So if you sit there and say, okay, hey, I just need to take a break from this. Like, I'm flooded. I don't even know what I'm feeling right now. I'm going to just pause it, take a break, take some minutes, do some deep breaths, go for a run, whatever you need to kind of calm your body down. Then usually we can re-engage and be like, well, what was it? What was I feeling that made it so I got to that place? And we can connect a little bit more. In terms of and how do you know the words?
Yeah.
There's great resources. You can Google it and just Google like feelings wheel.
Okay.
And it breaks it down. It's a circle and it'll give like kind of color coded portions of the triangle of like angry feelings, happy feelings, feeling families. And then it'll break it into like sub emotions and then even sub emotions under that. They can help you kind of learn what are those feelings a little bit more.
So the more you're talking about this, the name it and tame it, that was your phrase, name it and tame it. I love that. I was just jotting down. So I've been a licensed physical therapist for, oh my gosh, 35 years. And there's a big difference between a patient coming in and you saying, oh, you have back pain, generic, meaningless, tells us nothing about how to treat it. It could be facet, it could be muscle, it could be joint, it could be all these other things. And doing the evaluation to say, this is the cause of that, or at least a primary cause. And now let's do this. Or you have a bad race. There's a big difference between, oh, I had a bad race. Well, we can't do anything with that. Was it fueling? Was it preparation? Was it pacing? Was it you made? So I love this because it's giving us next step marching orders, or it's creating a plan for our emotions that isn't based on some generic throwaway term.
Yeah.
So it matters. Like, this is so powerful.
And I love what kind of that analogy that you were saying too, is like, often I'd say the anger is I ran a bad race. Like, yep. Get that you're angry. We all kind of usually can see angry. You saw that you didn't run a good race. Often the feelings under that though are a lot more vulnerable to it. Is it you were feeling hurt? Were you scared? Were you, overwhelmed and like overburdened? There's usually almost always there's something else underneath that anger, which is a lot more vulnerable. And it probably is more vulnerable to say like, well, you didn't fuel like the way you needed to, or you need to work on this area that's probably not your favorite to work on. That metaphor, I think, aligns really well, that sometimes it's even a different feeling that's underneath versus like a sub version of it.
And it gives you a plan for the next race or the next emotional outburst. Or once I recognize, oh, I was feeling disrespected, well, it's not like that takes it off the table next time, but allows you to immediately think, last time I was feeling disrespected, is that the same thing here? Does that person even know me? They can't disrespect me because they don't know me. So, okay.
Like the car, was it really personal that they cut you off?
Exactly. Probably. In my case, probably, Amy.
100%.
Exactly.
It's very personal for you.
All right. So a lot of studies suggest social support is vital for mental and physical health, but your work's a little more nuanced than that. Can you explain how the quality and nature of close relationships actually impacts health outcomes a little differently? Maybe there's an example or two you can throw out there for us.
Yeah, I'm going to think kind of broadly on all the research that's out there on close relationships.
Absolutely.
And there tends to be two elements that people really look at, and it's not surprising, it's like quantity and quality of relationships. And what we find is that quality relationships are way more important than quantity. And so when you think of, there's people that are kind of like the social butterfly, and they know a little bit of everybody in there. And you could list like, well, who's in your phone contact? And I'm like, well, here's my list. Then you can ask somebody, if you were experiencing like an emergency or like you were really lonely, who would you call on that list? And sometimes people who, even though they have this whole network, they're like, I don't know who I would call when I'm lonely. I don't know who I would put down as my, emergency contact for my colonoscopy. Wasn't life-threatening, but I don't know who. Like, yeah, probably if I was like rushing to the ER, I need someone to pick up my kids. I could call a lot of people.
Sure.
But could I do it just because I was having that bad day parenting and needed someone to tell me like, yeah, you actually are a good parent? Is there somebody I could call for that? And so that's kind of the quantity element. We want to have more than just one person, because one person can't be your everything. So we often know if you only have one, you're like, I'm going to them for my emotional needs, and they're also my best friend to go do everything with. And if I have any plans, it's going to be them. And, nobody can fill everybody's needs.
Right.
And that's going to hurt the relationship over time because it's too much pressure. So we want enough relationships that one person doesn't have to fill everything, but not so many, or you can have so many, but you at least want to have that quality piece too. And so having a list of people, kind of ballpark, say even like 3 to 5 people who you're like, hey, I could go to you. And maybe they're different people for different things, but that there's a level of quality to that relationship where I can go to you. I'll be there for you. You'll be there for me. But there's this deeper emotional connection in it. And that's really protective of our health outcomes. Just knowing that we have somebody there, it reduces our stress. It helps us, connect more positively. It can help us feel like we have a bigger meaning in the world too. And a lot of those are kind of the mechanisms through which the research is kind of posing these relationships impact, because we're not living in isolation. And we know isolation is strongly linked to things like depression, other mental health outcomes, isolation, right, even in the home. So kind of seeing that pattern happen there. So it's a lot about quality.
You're a licensed marriage and family therapist. You do this all the time. And you said that nobody's supposed to be able to fill all your needs. So I'm thinking of dating relationships or marriage, especially marriage, where a lot of people go into that marriage thinking, ta-da, like this is the solution to my life, no matter what was going on before. I'm sure you have these conversations multiple times a day where those expectations are, but you're supposed to be the one. And I know you could talk for 7 hours on this, so we don't have that much time. We don't get her for that long, everyone. But could you give some general advice for couples that maybe they're kind of feeling that way? Maybe they're a year or 2 or 5 or 12 years into marriage, and they're like, they are not filling these gaps I thought they were going to be. Like, I'm still, or ways to develop relationships that work, that don't take away from the marriage, but help allow you to not expect too much from your partner.
Yeah. It's a great question of like, where is that balance?
It's like a fine line.
It is. And I describe it as like a spectrum a lot of the time, that or a teeter-totter, maybe more than a spectrum. We want to be in the middle of it. On one side, we have over-connected relationships, which are, I always use the joke of like, they're the people that have the joint Facebook page. It's like you and me. It is a we. There is no you and me. You totally have a joint Facebook page. There's nothing wrong with that. But an image of we are a we. Right. There's not a you and a me. It's just we. Very much we're doing everything together. Versus on the other side of the teeter-totter, there's the roommate dynamic, where it's like, I do my thing, you do your thing. There's not much we, but we share space.
Yes.
The healthiest relationships are in the middle, where there's a really well-established you, me, and we in that relationship. So we have connection points. We have a lot of shared meaning. We're working towards shared goals. You're the person probably that they want to call when they had a really bad day for the first time. There's a strong unity there. And there's a strong individuality of you're working towards that dream and I'm working towards this, and we're supporting each other. But it's not my dream that you're having to do, or maybe it's just that, you love doing that activity and I never want to do it ever. Like, you're a skier and I hate the cold. Like, that's fine. I'm going to go read my book in the lounge. But then, at the end of the day, we reconnect and we have the resort we stay in every year. And it's like all of our memories and, family. That's just an example of a really strong you, me, and we. Yeah. I get to hang out on the lodge and I love it. You get to go on your ski adventure and you love it. We don't have to make each other love the other thing, but we love something together. And so I think maybe that if you're trying to find where are we at, assess where you're at on that spectrum. And then when we think of, well, can they be my ex? I want you to imagine being everything for somebody else. Dude, like that is so much pressure. It's overwhelming.
Yes.
No matter how much you love somebody, you're going to have a bad day. Or maybe you're going to have times where you can't give at all. And so to expect somebody to give you something that you can't give in return isn't going to be balanced. And so it's okay to be able to say, I had a bad day and I love you and I really want to listen to you, but I'm so overwhelmed right now. I don't know if I can take it on. Can we talk tomorrow? Or, actually, I don't have to love that activity that you love. I can love that you love it. And it doesn't mean I have to love it. And I would love for you to have a group that you go do that with, but it's not going to be my thing. And that's actually really okay. And so kind of being able to pick and choose, like, what are our things we do together? And what are our things that can be separate? And then having really good boundaries in that too. Because if it's like, well, I just had a fight with you, I don't recommend calling your best friend and saying, and they're such a jerk. Like, here's everything. Like, have boundaries of what stays between your relationship because you're still each other's primary connection.
Huge. Thank you.
But you can go and say, like, we had a fight. I don't want to talk about it, but I am stressed and I just need to calm down. Can we go to a movie together? Totally fine. So hitting that kind of boundary with each other, I think, is really important too.
That's good. You, me, we. That's a great phrase. I was out running with our pup this morning, and I was thinking about our interview, and just thinking one of the things I've seen, and I'm fortunate, I don't have to deal with this. Susanna's a very optimistic. She's got a high affect in terms of our engagement. But I was just thinking about the couple that they fall in love, whatever that means, and they get married, and then one of them realizes, because most of our listeners, I would guess here, are pretty, it's a health and wellness podcast. Like, they're pretty optimistic, upbeat people. Yeah. And what if they find themselves in either a friendship or a marriage relationship with someone who they're just kind of pessimistic, and yet they're committed to the marriage, they're committed to the relationship, maybe committed to the friendship. Any guidance for that? They're not going to change. You're not going to shift. Any guidance? Because I'm sure you see this all the time too.
I always like to lead with, the more we can understand something, like the less foreign something is to us, the easier it is for us to love it. And so if you are by nature a very optimistic person, you're going to see the glass that's half full, you're motivated. Something taught you to be that way. Maybe there's nature in it too. Maybe you were born that way a little bit, but often probably there's experiences that validated that for you. You saw that, like, hey, if I could dedicate myself to running that marathon and I worked hard enough, I'm going to run that marathon. Awesome. Like, that is the best experience, and how validating to that positive thinking. But somebody else might have done the exact same thing. They could have done every step that you did. And the night before their race, or maybe not the night before, the day before, they were doing their last training run and there was a pothole and they never expected, and they broke their ankle, and they were out for years. They never got to run their marathon. Just a fluke accident. I'm going to guess their perspective on things is a little bit different. It's not going to be, gosh, they just work out. It's going to be, where's the next pothole going to come? Because that stole my dream.
Right.
And so I'd say if you're coming at it from such a different perspective, maybe try to understand, like, well, what taught you to see the world that way? What is it doing for you? And often I think it's very protective. Like, if I keep the pothole coming, I'm not going to be crushed as much the next time that it comes. If I don't think that the best is going to happen, I won't be disappointed when it doesn't. Can I prepare myself for it? If I expect the worst to happen, then if it does, it won't hurt me as bad. Not usually true, but our brain likes to think it is. And so maybe you can understand that for them. And then maybe all of a sudden it's a little less annoying to you. So you're like, oh yeah, if I had broken my ankle too, I would probably have really struggled. And then maybe you can connect with them and to be like, yeah, when you broke your ankle, that was awful. And I get it. I get that it's probably scary to be really excited about it, but what could I do? What could I do to help you feel excited about it again? Or, is there a way I could support you in that? Is there a way we could be excited together? And now all of a sudden you have connection, which is going to feel better than anything else.
And as you're talking us through, you can see I've got this big smile on my face because it sounds like you're bringing us back to the name it and tame it concept, because instead of me saying, oh, Amy, you're just always so pessimistic, no, you have a pessimistic outlook on this one thing because of something that you went through. So we name that thing, and I stopped putting this blanket overview of Amy's a pessimist, because that's not necessarily true. It's that Amy is scared, nervous, distraught, whatever, about this certain situation. And me as your partner calling you, it's like naming you pessimistic instead of naming that certain situation and what went into that. That sounds pretty powerful. Am I hearing you right?
Exactly right. And I agree. It is so much more powerful instead of being like, hey, you're a pessimist.
Yeah.
But great. Well, what am I going to do to change that?
Yeah.
Particularly if I'm already a little unmotivated about things. Like, now you just don't, I mean, I don't even know what to do about that. But if I come at you and be like, I get it. You're so scared. And it makes sense that you'd be scared, but I still love you. And maybe we can't, do you want to run the half marathon together next time? All of a sudden we have connection, and it's beautiful, and it's not, there's no shame in it all of a sudden. And I think that it just revolutionizes how we communicate with people. And it does, it makes it so we can connect versus whenever we kind of put that judgment on somebody, we're disconnecting from them.
Right. Yeah. You just throw the blanket on them. And okay. So another thing that was really interesting you talked about, and then I've read some more of your writings on this, is the element of the nervous system, how it connects. So Susanna and I, with us being married for 31 years, our nervous systems literally have this, I don't know, like overplay on each other, influence on each other. Can you talk us through that a little bit? That was fascinating. I think we all get you kind of pick up people's vibe, that kind of stuff, but you took it deeper than that.
Yeah. And so the term for it, we call it co-regulation. And really co-regulation is just this idea that like our nervous systems speak to each other, even without us directly having words, we do speak to each other. And so when somebody's really escalated or overwhelmed and we present to them really calm, we can calm their nervous system. And so you see that all the time, like look at any movie where there's like a crisis response. And then the one person, like the police officer, whoever, is really calm and like, it's okay, it's shock. Like, that's actually what people are trained to do when they're shocked, is like, can I help somebody calm down and ground them? In reality, extreme example, we can do that anytime. Like you're really overwhelmed and you're like, oh my gosh, the day's so bad. And you can be like, yep, I'm with you. I hear you, but I'm not going to match your energy. Yeah, you're right. It's really overwhelming. We're really stressed out. I get it. But it's going to be okay. And I'm here for you. I want to talk to you. Even just that like calm, kind of regulated part of us can help the other person realize, oh, wait, we're probably safe. Like if you're not freaking out about this, then maybe I don't need to freak out about this. And it's very, subconscious and kind of on not a conscious control basis. But all of a sudden our nervous system is going to evaluate a threat differently because, well, if it's not threatening to you and we're literally in the same room,
right?
Is it threatening to me? Or like, maybe I misjudged it. And it gives our nervous system a chance to be like, what? Like, is that right? And sometimes it can calm us down like, oh, well, if you're really safe, you can ground me. We can do that with anybody. But also the closer relationship we have with somebody, the more powerfully and the more quickly we can do that. So romantic partners, parents and children, they are the quickest person to be able to regulate somebody else because there's this safety and security and trust that's kind of intuitive in those healthy relationships. And so being able to kind of channel that up like, oh, it only takes one person sometimes to de-escalate a conflict. And you're like, oh, you're really overwhelmed. If I have the capacity to regulate, I might be able to pull our interaction down too. And I think that's a really powerful way of interacting.
I just saw a study I think it was last week before, talking about athletic coaches and how, say, a football coach, their response to something that happens on the field has a huge impact on the player's response. So if a field goal gets missed and the coach is like, this is terrible, I can't believe that, what is your guys' problem? Versus, all right, next play, let's get this done. That the players absorb that. And it's exactly what you're talking about. How about when it's taken to the extreme? So super good friends, hanging out together, one's having a terrible day and the other one instead of calming them, they take on the terrible emotions. It's like they want to be supportive, and so they kind of absorb that negative energy and, oh yeah, me too. I'm having any advice on that? Because it seems like that just spirals then in a negative direction instead of being supportive or helpful or moving in the better direction.
Yeah. And I think you're actually kind of describing two different phenomena that mirror each other.
Yeah.
And that, so the co-regulation piece it's a very natural process. I guess they're both natural, but we don't always have a ton of control over like how our nervous system is going to decide to act. We do have more control about taking on people's emotions.
Okay.
And so if I'm sitting there saying, and you're telling me all about your bad day, I ain't going to try to connect with you in that. But if I'm jumping into your feelings, I'm actually not helping regulate you at all. I'm like kind of overpowering that system.
Making it worse.
And what I'm doing is I'm trying to connect. It's usually very well intentioned, but I'm actually stepping over. And I'm actually going to end up making it about me a little bit more, most likely. Like, oh my gosh, you're overwhelmed and you're upset. And yeah, I'm so upset about it too. Like, oh my gosh. And now all of a sudden you're like, well, you don't need to be upset. Like, no, it's okay. It's not that bad. I'm not that upset. Like, don't worry about it. And now all of a sudden you're minimizing your upset in your bad day to comfort me because I was upset about your bad day. And that's not a very healthy dynamic at all. And so having to sit there and say, what are your emotions and what are my emotions in this moment? Your emotions are you had a bad day. You're frustrated. You're overwhelmed. You're sad. You're all of those things. My emotions are, I'm probably really sad that you are. I am sad that you're having a bad day. I care about you. I don't want you to. But I am not directly impacted by your bad day. I mean, I might be if you're like taking it out on me and I have other feelings. But it's your boss yelling at you is not making me sad. I have empathy for it. I can have compassion towards you for it. But it doesn't become mine. And I think having that separation of, are your feelings becoming my feelings? Or am I having my own feelings for you? And if I'm having feelings for you, I'm like, gosh, that sucks. And I'm really empathetic. And hey, actually, what can I do to help you feel better? That's probably more of the co-regulation versus stepping over it and saying like, all of a sudden your nervous system is my nervous system and we're so in it together. It's more meshed, which is not what we want. We want to still be separate from each other.
And then let me add to it. Oh, you had a bad day. Me too. Mine was just similar to yours. But I get you said that so well, though, that we're trying to connect by saying, well, we have this in common. Here were my negative things. And that, but then we're just creating this cycle. So it's kind of, again, that tightrope between the Pollyanna. Oh, yeah, you're good. Remember, it was so beautiful today. Did you not see the sunrise? Blah, 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 blah. And the other extreme we just talked about. We want to be in that supportive, hearing, what can I do to help? But stop at that point.
Exactly. I think one of the great examples I use is often like with grief and loss. Two of the things that we most frequently hear people say that are entirely unhelpful are either, it's okay, they're in a better place. Yes. That's kind of the Pollyanna approach.
Right. Or
things along that line, which is like, cool, and that might be true, but I want them here.
Right.
And it's actually not okay with me.
Right.
And but am I bad now because I should be happy that they're somewhere better?
Right.
Like it's very confusing. So that's the Pollyanna approach, and it's very dismissive of their reality and their pain. Yeah. On the flip side, I know exactly what you're going through.
Right.
That's it. And the answer is no, you don't. You might have had a loss. You might have lost the same type of relationship, but it's different because every loss experience is different.
Right.
And so you might be able to connect with it, but you don't know exactly how I'm feeling. Right. And by telling me that, we just disconnected. Right. And so I think that's just maybe a great example of those two extremes where the most powerful thing can be is, yeah, this sucks. I see that for you. And what do you need from me, right? Because I can support you in whatever your reality is.
Yeah. Amy, that's so good. I have so many questions we're not even going to get close to. So let me grab a couple of them. You talk about, you've looked at age groups. Can you highlight some of the specific challenges or opportunities about how close relationships affect health in the various stages of life, adolescence, adulthood, elderly population? Are there some unexpected patterns that you've seen in those stages that maybe we're not aware of?
So I haven't done direct research like comparing them, but speaking kind of generally what we know developmentally is close relationships are important throughout our lifespan, but they do change. So in childhood, I think up until about middle school, our parents and sometimes our siblings, like those are the most important relationships to us. But our parents are who are going to provide us consistency, security, safety. They're what we call our primary attachment figure. So in that childhood stage, we have a pretty, I mean, you might have sleepovers or some,
Sure.
But your social support is coming from your family. And so when we study that social support, it's often very family rooted in that age group because that's where safety is coming from. In adolescence, we start to go through a transition process, which is why adolescence is such a roller coaster of a time. But they're transitioning from their family being their secure base to peers, starting to be. That's why there's a lot of stepping outside of the home. And so like peer rejection, they also have a lot going on in their brain, which makes them very sensitive to what other people are thinking of us. Very natural cognitive process, but not always helpful. And so they're very, very sensitive to what other people are thinking of me, feeling rejected from a peer group, influenced by peer pressure. And sometimes we find that very frustrating with that age group, especially as like parents or people working with them, teachers. And it's also very typical for that to happen because they're trying to step out of that family unit and find new connections elsewhere. It's really important. And then we go into kind of young adulthood. I'm going to say like most of adulthood actually, and we switch into usually our intimate partner or a really close friend becomes that primary person. And so our families are still really important to us, but it's kind of that build your own family stage of life. And our primary attachment starts to be somebody we've picked for ourselves. And we start to have a broader network of people. So we have our primary person, we still have our family of origin people, and we have a lot of other friends. So we start to get a lot more social connections and really wanting to have deep relationships there. And then as we kind of transition into older adulthood, we start to see the reduction of social networks in a very sad way. Usually, people start to pass away or we start to lose certainly family first. And then typically you might start losing friends or a significant other. And that's where a lot of the research in isolation in older adulthood comes in. It's like, how can we help people still have these deep emotional connections, even though the connections they've had for pretty much their whole life might have ended not due to their choice, and still trying to find that connection and meaning there. So it does go through kind of a normative cycle, but in each stage, having a couple people that are really safe and secure for you is pretty essential to our well-being.
So are there, with each one of those transitions, are there landmines you see happening a lot that people aren't aware of? Or are there things that when people, I know therapy over the years has looked more at, instead of how do we avoid the bad, it's more like how do we mimic the ones that are going well? Are there things people have successfully gone through transition that you've seen over and over that would be a couple steps people could take? So as parents are seeing their kids move into the adolescence, as adolescents are moving into that early create your own family section, as you get to the phase where some of your friends are starting to pass away now, are there any, I don't know, little tools we can throw in our toolbox? Again, knowing this is a brief format conversation, but things that people could have in the back of their minds thinking, oh, as I'm getting older, I need to develop some friendships in the age group behind me, just so I don't constantly, just things like that.
Exactly. Yeah. I think one thing I would say is always trying to have at least one person in your life who is a safe place for you is very important. And actually in adolescence, there's a theory called positive youth development. And it looks at like protective factors for what makes an adolescent more risk, more or less resilient, or more or less likely to be. And one of the strongest protective factors they found is having like one adult, even outside of their parents, who is a safe, responsive coach, a youth pastor, an aunt, an uncle, like whoever that is, but one safe adult who they can go to and they know is in their corner is like one of the biggest protective things for teenagers. And so I say that
outside of that circle,
throughout.
outside of family, outside of those close friends.
Just somebody who's there for them kind of unconditionally.
Right.
And so I'd say wanting to have that kind of person throughout your life, like who is somebody that you can have. And, that might be a mentor for a lot of your career. Like maybe there's somebody in the workplace and, you can go to them. Maybe you wouldn't always, but there's a really safe person. Right. Or maybe it is looking, behind you in age as you get older and still finding that really close relationship. There's also this idea of, especially in adulthood, we talk about generativity, which is this feeling of like, how am I giving back and making a difference in the world, and finding ways to create meaning in your life, especially if there's loss that's happening, can be really helpful. We can't always control losing a relationship, but also if we feel like we have this broad kind of systemic impact. So that might be mentoring at a job. It might be the way you've parented and seeing your kids thrive. Maybe it's reading at a library though, or one of my dreams is to have a dog to go take into like hospitals. I have a dog. Not probably the most hospital friendly dog, but like be able to take and like have that therapy dog and go do visits and that would be a way I'd want to give back. And so finding whatever that thing is for you. But like this is the way that I'm still connecting to the world, and it might not be this close relationship, but I do feel like my life has value and meaning, and I'm making an impact in the world is really important to our well-being too.
Through each of those phases.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Especially probably like adolescence and beyond. Most kids don't care so much about whether they're making a difference in the world, but.
All right. So subject of age, we've talked about our role of communication skills on the health of our telomeres and thus our mitochondria. Mm-hmm. Without shifting us into a chemistry class, can you explain the essentials around mitochondria and telomeres and aging and that kind of stuff? Just give us a cursory overview of that, because folks are hearing more and more about that in the research. We likely will have some ways to test that in the coming years. Fill us in a little bit. Yeah.
So on a very kind of basic level, there's this idea that as our telomeres replicate, every time our cells replicate, they're a little bit shorter in size because we lose a little bit of material every time our cells replicate. And at some point, our cells can't replicate. There's not enough of that left to sustainably replicate. And that's how we see the aging process. We start to slow down replication, they get shorter. And at some point in life, our cells stop being able to do that. And that's usually where end of life is going to show up if we go like without illness or death. And so one of the ideas behind the research in telomeres is that if we can slow down that level of how fast the telomeres are shrinking, we can basically extend cell life and then have healthier aging or even longer lifespans, because if that theory is correct, we have more time, they shrink slower, we can replicate more, we live longer, and we live healthier. And so there's a lot that's being looked into of what factors are going to either speed up or slow down that cell aging. One area that they've been looking into is like kind of the proteins that guide that replication process and the telomeres. Is there a way that we can increase or reduce that's going to influence it? And then if we go back to the relationships, one area that's pretty new in the area is looking at whether conflict actually is going to speed up that. And we know stress and cortisol is linked to that. And we also know conflict is linked to stress, cortisol, and it can even change like our cortisol pathways in our bodies. So thinking, well, if conflict changes our cortisol, does then conflict change the rate at which our cells age? Therefore, conflict would impact our physical aging. And so there's not like a total 100%, this is what's happening, because it's very, very new research.
Totally.
But that's kind of the theory behind a lot of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. A couple more. It's often said our romantic relationships significantly impact our well-being. How does your research shed light on the connection between romantic partnerships and both mental and physical health outcomes? And are there particular aspects of romantic relationships that seem to rise to the top in terms of what you're reading and what you're seeing?
Yeah. And so the reason why romantic relationships tend to be one of those biggest predictors is they're the relationships closest to us. They're what we call our primary attachment. And so they provide a lot of safety and security in our lives. Whoever our primary attachment figure is a safe source. It's our secure base to go into the world. And so typically that is our romantic partner in adulthood. In childhood, it's our parent, which is why in childhood we look at parent-child relationships so much as well. But that's the idea, is like whoever your primary attachment figure is, your secure base, is going to be really predictive of your well-being. And we know that people who don't have that tend to not do as well. And so we want to have a secure relationship. We want to have a secure base in that. And so typically things that really help relationships be positive are things that help us have a secure relationship. So certainly not having any, breaches of trust or injuries to our trust helps that. Being able to understand what your partner, who they are and what they need in times of stress can be really important. Are they somebody who needs you to sit with them? Are they the person who just needs like that big bear hug that's going to help them? Are they here's your favorite Starbucks, and I'm going to let you sit by yourself for 15 minutes. Like, what is it that's going to make them feel safe in moments, and being able to respond to that helps build security. I always talk a lot about that. It's the little actions during the day that tell us we're safe and known. So is it that text of, hey, I'm thinking about you, or the fact that they made your coffee in the morning, or that they go and scrape your ice off your car when it's snowy, and nobody likes doing that, and it makes you feel loved. Like, what are those little actions we do in a day to build security in our relationships? But broadly, when our relationships feel really safe and they feel really secure, like, I know we might have problems. We're going to fight. We're going to disagree. That's normal and healthy.
Yep.
Exactly. But on a fundamental level, I know that you're there. I know that you love me, and I know I'm safe with you. That's going to change the way we can interact in the entire world. And know that we always have our home to come home to.
So I've covered my list of questions with notes all over the place here. And I've noticed that you've used that phrase, feel safe and known, over and over and over and over. Is that one of the cornerstones of what you're trying to help your clients work through? Is it almost like, all right, all this other stuff we've talked about and gone through, and all the research and the books, it really, two of the cornerstones are feel safe and known. Has that just been because of the questions I've asked you, or is that truly a core element of what we need to work towards in relationships?
Yeah, I think that's a great insight. And yes, it's very much a cornerstone that when in our close relationships, it's hard to have one without the other. If you're not known, how can you really be safe with somebody? But if you're not safe with them, why do they deserve to know you? And so they go hand in hand, that to be really known, we have to have it be really safe. And it's also, for us to earn the privilege of knowing someone, we need to be a safe person.
Right.
And when we can build those together, we create an environment where it's like, not only do I love you, but I know you. I know your faults. I know the things that are great in the world, and I still choose you. And I choose you in our arguments, and I choose to learn to better myself, to be the best partner I can be. And you're doing the same for me. And therefore we can weather a lot, because I know you, and we're safe together. And I think that it ties into everything. We create safety by knowing emotions. We can create safety and knowing by co-regulating with each other. We build into those things with everything we've talked about. All of them help to foster that level of being known and being safe in our relationships.
With that said, and many other things you've talked about as a therapist, and I know you don't make a decision about your clients before they have a chance, but are you able to, within a couple of sessions, are you able to feel like this one's going to turn the corner if we can just do a few things, and this couple, I mean, I'm hopeful, but there's just so much here, I don't see it happening. Do you get that sense?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that lead into that sense, but there's certainly that. One of the most famous relationship researchers, John Gottman, has a pretty high tested accuracy at being able to listen to one conflict communication, and by the patterns that show up in conflict, being able to predict if the relationship stays together or not. So there's actually like science behind that.
Right.
I'm nowhere near as good or accurate as him. I don't claim that in any way. Maybe yet, but maybe ever. But because he's done so much research and understanding communication patterns, he can pretty accurately predict the outcome. Wow. And so when I then look at couples, a few of the things that I always look for that tell me like, hey, how optimistic am I here? Is one, the motivation to change yourself. You cannot change somebody else. Could I be amazing at my job? But I can't. Neither can anyone else. And so
coaches, remember that we can't change people. It's intrinsic motivation. All right, keep going. Sorry.
I love it. But yes, when each partner is really motivated to make change, to be able to say, what can I do to be a better partner? Can I hear what my partner is needing? And then I'm going to make changes, even though I need things too. And of course, the other person needs to be doing that. But if both people are really willing to say, okay, here's what I can do differently, you're going to see change so much faster. And then the other thing that I often really look for is positive regard. Like, are we still at a place where you genuinely, more often than not, you're probably really stressed if you're coming to see me, but more often than not, you genuinely view your partner positively or are willing to get there. Because that tends to buffer a lot of things. And we know when we get into this negative sentiment place, it's very predictive of divorce. It's hard to overcome. But my biggest piece of advice, if people are noticing struggles, research shows that it's an average of 6 years from when a couple will start seeing trouble to when they actually come to see a therapist.
Wow.
It's huge. And like the weeds that you can pull at year one are very different.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
Pulling at 6 years.
Yes.
So I always encourage people like go see a relationship coach, even when things are healthy and good. I love the coaching work that I've done with couples of just like positive and addressing the little weeds. Or if you're having bigger problems, go see a therapist. There's no shame in it.
Right.
Most relationships can benefit it at some time, but don't let it get to 6 years.
Right.
Because that's going to be the hard work to fix it.
Right. Great advice. All right. One more, and then I'm going to open one up that I'm just curious for yourself. In your work, have you identified cultural or societal factors that influence the relationship between these things that we've talked about, our interactions and our health outcomes? And how can we adapt your findings to better understand and address these, integrate these with diverse populations?
Yeah. Well, you picked up on one of my like passion points in that too. I'll say relationship research is somewhat notoriously bad at being diverse.
Yes. Thank you.
Probably all research is, but relationship research in general is pretty much middle-class white heterosexual couples. There's a lot of change that's happening there, and a lot of the big names and like evidence-based programs are working to change that. And if we look at just like history and amount of data we have, it doesn't exist to the extent that it needs to.
Right.
And so I think that when I work with couples, one of the things that I really try to hold is I can't say without a doubt that this evidence-based technique is going to work for you because it wasn't ever tested in that. And so I try to bring a lot of cultural humility to my work. I try to really understand where people are coming from in that and be like, I have these ideas, but like, let's figure out how it works for you. And what I tell pretty much everybody I work with is you are the expert of you. Yes. I'm an expert in the room because I do have a lot of training. I have knowledge, I have expertise, but I will never, ever be the expert of you. There's no way. And so you have to tell me, like, if I say something that doesn't fit right, I use the example of like, if I tell you to go journal about something and you hate journaling, but you tell me it's a great idea, I'm going to be like, awesome, let's journal all the time. If you tell me I will never pick up a journal in my life, Amy, I'm going to be like, cool, let's do it differently. Let's figure out what else we can do. And so I always encourage people like be the expert. And I want to learn about you and your relationship and help guide your relationship to where you want it to be. And we talk a lot about like how we grew up and like the lessons we learned about relationships. We talk a lot about what does a good, healthy relationship look like to you, but being very collaborative with people to figure out like what's our starting point and what's the ending point that we're actually working towards. And even if that's not the ending point that I would want based off of my culture and my background and my experiences, it can still be healthy. Yeah. And so I always have that conversation. My first like 4 sessions are pretty much dedicated to goal setting and figuring that out because of that. Yeah. And putting that out there of we definitely need more research that's much more diverse. And so I'm hoping that's the direction of the future, but we play with what we can right now.
Well, and I think just you saying that has got to be so powerful because and I don't know exactly how a scenario would go with you, but I would think oftentimes at least one of the two in the partnership is coming in saying, oh, she doesn't get me. Like she's on your side or she's whatever. It just seems like that would be a natural. And for you to say, you're the expert of you. Like, yeah, I've read a lot. I have a PhD in this. I've got these certifications. I've got this many years of experience, but I don't have any experience being you. I don't have any experience with your history, background, support systems, et cetera, et cetera. It seems like that would really create some momentum. Do you sense that with your clients where they kind of let some air out and go, oh, well, this is kind of cool?
I think so. I hope so at the very least. But I do think there is a lot of power in that. Yeah. And I think there's a lot in our lives and our society, depending on like what identities we have and how we've been experiencing the world. For so many people, we don't get, like society tells us they get to know what's better. Right. They get to tell us what we're supposed to do, what roles we're supposed to fulfill, the shoulds and the shouldn't. And actually to be in a space where you're like, no, you know yourself better than anybody else. And at least in this room, in this space, you get to own that. Yeah. I think it's something we need more of. Yeah. But I do think it's something really special that we get to do too.
Yeah, it's powerful. That's one of the things we love about coaching. And the coaches that have been through a credible program know this. We're not there to tell people what to do. And so often people come into coaching, and I would guess they do it with counseling as well, thinking they're going to get a list of things they're supposed to do, an exercise program they're supposed to do, certain things they're supposed to eat or not eat, a schedule they're supposed to follow. And that's not coaching. Coaching is come alongside and finding out what matters to you in your specific situation, life, et cetera, and how can I help you be a better you, not a miniature version of me. So I love the way you echoed that. Amy, you've given me more time than I requested, so thank you. One last question. How have you applied your findings in your own life, in your own relationships?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. I certainly will say we never get to the point where we don't engage in those communication patterns. I have studied them. I did my dissertation on them. I talk about them every single day. And sometimes I sit there and I'm like, Amy, what in the world are you doing? Like, where in the world did this come from? You should know better than this. And so I think one thing in my own life, I think there's a lot of room for grace. We are human fundamentally. And it doesn't matter how many years, how much training I've had in listening well or how to talk about things. Sometimes you still need someone to proofread the email for you and be like, am I sounding good? Or sometimes I still need to be like, and I don't know why I just said that. Like, I get that was wrong. I'm sorry. Yeah. And so I think there's a humility in that too, which also I think helps my work be better as well. Recognition. But certainly I very much try to lead with understanding most of the time. Even with my friends and the people that I work with, I really do try to give people that power of like, tell me about you. Like, I don't want to make assumptions. I want to know a little bit more about where you're coming from. I really value that in my relationships too. The people who are closest to me are going to give that to me because I think that's really important. But really trying to sit there and say, I don't have to know what to do in all these situations, but I can always ask. And then one of the other lessons that I've learned is it's always better to do something than nothing. So if I have somebody who's struggling in their life and I know they're going through a hard time, I try to, whether it's a card in the mail or it's sending a gift or it's showing up and saying, I'll do your laundry or whatever that could be. I just really learned that it's always better to do something to show somebody that you're in your boat than do the cliche, like, what can I do to support you? Right. I think that's one of the biggest ways it's shown up.
Right. Love that. Amy, really appreciate it. Thank you. I knew this would be great, especially based on our chance to hear you at the retreat, but thanks for joining us. Thanks for making the time and keep us up to date on what you're working on.
Thanks again for having me. This was such a pleasure. I've been looking forward to it. So I really appreciate it.
Did you get some good notes there? Thanks again to Dr. Smith for her willingness to bring the relational opportunities we all have to life. Quick reminder for employers, benefit consultants, and complementary wellness providers, it is now easy to integrate personalized, board-certified behavioral, physical, mental well-being coaching into any program or platform, or simply offer it as a standalone benefit, especially now with our trademark 360 Wellbeing Checkup. And if you're wanting to integrate high-performance or executive coaching, that is also available. Please reach out to us anytime, discuss details, results at catalystcoaching360.com, or you can visit the website anytime, catalystcoaching360.com. And now, it's time to be that catalyst. This is Catalyst Coaching 360, Dr. Brad Cooper. Make it a great rest of your week, and I'll speak with you soon on the next episode of the Catalyst 360 podcast, or maybe over on the YouTube coaching channel.